Her father was in the Air Force, and actually they only got over there about 2 months before I left. I was seeing her, and she was at the airport when I left. And
August 16th, 1977. Memphis, Tennessee. The air was thick, the summer heat suffocating, and somewhere inside Graceland, the world was about to crack open in a way it had never fully healed from since. By the time the ambulance left the driveway, fans had already begun gathering at the gates. They didn't know yet. They couldn't have. But something in the atmosphere felt wrong. That specific, inexplicable kind of wrong that settles into a city before the news does. Within hours, every radio station in America would go quiet before the announcement. And then came those words. Elvis Presley was dead at 42 years old. The grief was immediate, and it was enormous. Grown men wept on street corners. Women collapsed outside the gates of Graceland. Flowers piled so high, they became walls. The whole world stopped, turned, and stared at Memphis like it had swallowed something sacred and refused to give it back. And in the days that followed, hundreds of thousands of people made the pilgrimage, not to a concert, not to a tour stop, but to say goodbye to a man most of them had never met, yet somehow felt they'd known their entire lives. That's the thing about Elvis. He wasn't just a musician. He was a feeling. He was Saturday nights and first kisses in car radios and a version of America that believed it could be anything it wanted to be. Losing him didn't just feel like losing a celebrity. It felt like losing a piece of something that could never be rebuilt. And so, when Graceland opened its doors for the public viewing on August 17th, the line stretched for miles. People waited for hours in brutal summer heat just to walk past that copper-lined casket and see him one last time, to make it real, to say goodbye with their own eyes. Because that's what humans do. We need to see things to believe them. We need proof. We need closure. What they saw, reportedly, was Elvis, dressed in a white suit, hands folded, eyes closed, still and silent in a way that no one who had ever seen him perform could quite reconcile with the man who used to own every room he walked into. People cried. People reached out to touch the casket. Some fainted. The grief in that room was as real as grief gets. But then came the photograph. The National Enquirer published it on their front page just days after the funeral, and it hit the public like a second shockwave. Someone, a cousin of Elvis's, it was later revealed, had smuggled a camera into Graceland during the viewing and taken a photo of Elvis lying in his casket. It was grainy. It was invasive. It was everything journalism wasn't supposed to be. And it became one of the best-selling issues of any tabloid in American publishing history because people needed to see it. Even the ones who said it was disgusting bought a copy. Even the ones who called it a violation couldn't look away. But here's where the story stops being about grief and starts being about something far more unsettling. Because that photograph, the one meant to provide closure, the one meant to be the final, undeniable proof that Elvis Aaron Presley was gone, didn't bring peace. It brought questions, quiet ones at first, the kind people whispered in diners and barbershops and didn't dare say too loudly. The face in that photo looked different, not just swollen from the heat or aged from the years of hard living, different in a way that was harder to name, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. For decades, those whispers were easy to dismiss. Grief does strange things to perception. People want mysteries because mysteries mean there's still hope, still a chance the ending wasn't real. That's just human nature, right? And so the questions about that photograph were filed away under conspiracy theory, under delusion, under the desperate bargaining of fans who couldn't let go. until a forensic analyst looked at it. Not a fan, not a blogger with a theory. A credentialed professional, someone whose entire career is built on the precise, methodical science of identifying human faces, mapping bone structure, analyzing biometric data with the kind of cold, clinical detachment that leaves no room for wishful thinking. Someone who had no emotional stake in Elvis Presley, no childhood memories tied to his records, no grief left over from 1977. Just the tools of forensic science and a photograph that had been sitting in plain sight for nearly 50 years. She ran her analysis. She cross-referenced the casket photo against dozens of authenticated images of Elvis taken throughout his life, photographs where his identity was beyond dispute. She measured. She mapped. She compared with the same rigor applied to criminal investigations and courtroom evidence. And when she was done, she didn't hedge. She didn't qualify. She looked at the data, and she said 4 words that should have shaken the foundation of everything the public had been told. This is not Elvis. 4 words. And suddenly, every whisper from every diner and barbershop for the last 5 decades didn't sound so crazy anymore. Because if she's right, if the science actually holds, then the question is no longer whether Elvis died on August 16, 1977. The question becomes something far darker. Who exactly did they put in that casket? More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. Here's the thing about forensic science that most people don't fully appreciate. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about legacy or grief or the cultural weight of a name. It doesn't care that the man in question sold over 1 billion records or that his face is still printed on t-shirts in every tourist trap from Memphis to Tokyo. Forensic science only cares about one thing: what the evidence actually says. And what the evidence says about that casket photograph is something that becomes harder and harder to explain away the deeper you go into it. The first thing the analyst flagged wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of detail that makes you gasp immediately. It was the ear. That might sound almost trivial at first. The ear? Of all the things to focus on, the ear? But in forensic biometric analysis, the human ear is one of the most reliable identifiers on the body. More reliable, in many cases, than facial features that shift with age and weight. The structure of the outer ear, the specific architecture of the helix, the antihelix, the earlobe's attachment point, is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint and far more stable across a lifetime. It doesn't change significantly whether you're 21 or 42. It doesn't bloat or hollow with weight fluctuation. It is essentially a fixed biological signature. When the analyst compared the ear visible in the casket photograph against authenticated photographs of Elvis taken throughout his career, concert shots, candid photos, professional portraits, images where the identity was absolutely beyond question, the measurements didn't align. The proportions were off. The specific contours of the helix didn't match. These weren't marginal differences that could be chalked up to camera angle or photographic distortion. They were structural, consistent. The kind of discrepancy that, in a forensic context, means one of two things. Either the photographs are mislabeled, or the person in one of them is not who they're claimed to be. And the ear was only the beginning. The analyst then moved to the facial bone structure, the brow ridge, the bridge of the nose, the angle of the jaw. Now, these are features that can shift with dramatic weight gain and by 1977, Elvis had gained a significant amount of weight. That part was never in dispute. His health had been deteriorating for years, and the physical toll was visible to anyone who had seen him perform in his final months. So the Analyst accounted for that. She built in the expected variance. She adjusted her mapping to reflect what extreme weight gain does to the soft tissue of the face, while leaving the underlying bone structure intact. And even with every reasonable adjustment applied, the numbers still didn't resolve. The brow ridge in the Casket photograph sat at a measurably different position relative to the eye socket than in authenticated Elvis images. The nose bridge carried a slightly different angle. The jaw, even obscured by the fullness of his later years, tracked along a different geometric line. Individually, each of these discrepancies might be explainable. Taken together as a complete facial map, they formed a pattern that the Analyst described as inconsistent with a match. Then came the detail that sent the quietest kind of chill through everyone who heard it: the weight. By most accounts, Elvis weighed somewhere between 250 and 350 pounds at the time of his death. His health had collapsed badly in his final years. The prescription drug dependency, the erratic eating, the physical inactivity, all of it had compounded into a body that bore almost no resemblance to the young man who had once moved across a stage like lightning. People who saw him in his final performances were shocked. His face was round, his frame heavy, his movements labored. That was the physical reality of Elvis Presley in the summer of 1977. But the body in the Casket photograph didn't reflect that reality. The face, while not thin, did not carry the specific distribution of weight that documented photographs from his final months showed. The neck, the jaw, the area beneath the eyes, they didn't align with what someone carrying that much weight through those specific years would look like, even in death, even after an embalming process. It was subtle, but it was there. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is where the wax figure theory entered the conversation, and before you dismiss it as the fever dream of obsessive fans, understand that it didn't originate with fans at all. It originated in quiet, private conversations among people in the funeral industry. Embalmers, morticians, people who work with bodies professionally and who, when shown the Casket photograph, noted that the skin texture and overall presentation had qualities more consistent with a prepared wax reconstruction than with a chemically embalmed human body. Nobody said it loudly, nobody put their name on it publicly, but the conversation existed, and it has never fully stopped. And then there was the hair. The color was slightly darker than the natural black-brown Elvis had maintained in his later years, the texture appearing almost theatrical in its precision, the positioning unnaturally perfect for a man who had just been through the physical trauma of a sudden death and a rushed preparation process. Every single one of these details, presented in isolation, is deniable. But the Analyst wasn't presenting them in isolation. She was presenting them as a complete forensic picture. And that picture pointed in one direction with a clarity that made the next question completely unavoidable. If the people closest to Elvis, Priscilla, Vernon, the Memphis Mafia, the Colonel, if they all stood in that room and viewed that body, and not one of them raised an alarm, maybe it's because they already knew exactly what they were looking at. There's a version of this story where everything is exactly what it was presented to be, where a deeply unwell man, broken by fame and dependency and the slow collapse of everything he'd built, simply reached the end of his road on an ordinary Tuesday in August. where the grief was real, the casket was legitimate, and the questions that followed were nothing more than the desperate mythology that humans construct around people they're not ready to lose. That version is cleaner. It's easier. And for a long time, it was the only version most people were willing to consider. But then you start looking at the people surrounding Elvis's death. Not the fans, not the forensic analysts working from photographs decades later. The people who were there, the people who made decisions in those critical 48 hours, and the moment you start examining their behavior with any real scrutiny, that clean, easy version of the story begins to develop fractures. Start with Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel Tom Parker was Elvis's manager for over 2 decades, the architect of his career, the man who controlled nearly every professional decision Elvis ever made, and who took an almost incomprehensible 50% of everything Elvis earned. Their relationship was complicated in ways that biographers have spent entire careers trying to untangle. Parker was domineering, financially suffocating, and by most accounts, one of the primary reasons Elvis felt so trapped in the final years of his life. He needed Elvis to be a product. And products don't get to just walk away. When Elvis died, the people around Parker expected devastation. They expected a man who had just lost his primary source of income and his life's central project to be undone by it. What they got instead was something that struck almost everyone who witnessed it as profoundly strange. Parker was calm, focused. Almost immediately, he was on the phone with IRCA, with licensing partners, with merchandising contacts. Within hours of Elvis's death being announced, Colonel Tom Parker was already restructuring the business of Elvis Presley's legacy with a kind of efficiency that doesn't come from shock. It comes from preparation. Then there's the autopsy, and this is where the official story starts asking more questions than it answers. The autopsy on Elvis Presley was conducted with a speed that medical examiners themselves have since described as unusual for a case of that complexity and public significance. The initial findings were murky. The cause of death disputed almost immediately between cardiac arrhythmia and the staggering number of prescription drugs found in his system. But rather than allowing that dispute to unfold transparently, the full autopsy report was sealed. Not summarized, not partially released, sealed. Under Tennessee law, it was locked away from public access for decades, and the complete toxicology findings remained outside of public reach long after most people had stopped demanding them. Why do you seal the autopsy of a celebrity? What is in those findings that required that level of institutional protection? The official answer has always been privacy, protecting the family from additional pain. But families of public figures don't typically get to seal autopsy records in cases where the cause of death is already publicly contested. Someone with significant influence made that happen. And the question of who benefited most from the public never fully knowing what was in that report is not a comfortable one to sit with. Ginger Alden was the woman who found Elvis's body that afternoon. Her account has been told and retold across interviews, books, and documentaries. And on the surface, it reads as exactly what it claims to be: the traumatic discovery of someone she cared for lying on the bathroom floor of Graceland. But people who have studied her various tellings of that story over the years have noted subtle inconsistencies in the details. Not damning contradictions, not proof of anything, just the kind of small, persistent variations that make investigators pause and ask whether the story being told is the story that was experienced or the story that was agreed upon. Then there's the matter of the casket itself, specifically, who decided it should be open. Elvis had expressed preferences, as many people do, about how he wanted to be remembered. A closed casket was consistent with those preferences, and yet Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, pushed for an open casket viewing accessible to the public. The official reasoning was that the fans deserved to say goodbye, which is understandable on a human level. But it also meant that the body, whatever body was in that casket, would be seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And there is a particular kind of psychological logic to that if you think about it carefully. The best place to hide something is in plain sight. Make enough people believe they've seen the truth with their own eyes, and the truth becomes very difficult to challenge. The FBI and DIA files on Elvis Presley exist. They are partially declassified and publicly accessible. What they contain is not explosive on its own. Surveillance notes, concerns about his associations, references to his cooperation with law enforcement on certain matters. But they confirm something important. Elvis Presley was not simply a musician living outside the reach of institutional attention. There were people in powerful places who knew things about his life that the public did not. And when powerful institutions know things about you, the architecture of what's possible in terms of a managed disappearance becomes considerably more believable. And underneath all of it, beneath the colonel's cold efficiency, the sealed autopsy, the open casket, the federal files, sits the most uncomfortable financial reality of all. By 1977, Elvis Presley was worth significantly more as a legend than as a living man. The tours were costing more than they earned. The lawsuits were mounting. The physical deterioration was accelerating toward a point of no return. But a dead Elvis? A dead Elvis was an industry. A dead Elvis was immortal. Which raises the one question that reframes everything that came before it. What if Elvis didn't just die on August 16th, 1977? What if he chose to? Before you dismiss that question, before you file it away under fantasy or denial, or the kind of thinking that belongs on late-night radio and not in serious conversation, consider what Elvis Presley's life actually looked like from the inside in the years leading up to August 1977. Not the mythology, not the sequin suits and the sold-out arenas and the cultural godhood, the actual interior reality of the man living that life. He was a prisoner. That's not a metaphor, that's how the people closest to him described it, and more importantly, that's how he described it. His private journals, portions of which have been referenced by biographers who were granted access to people in his inner circle, contain passages that speak with quiet devastation about the suffocation of his own existence, about wanting to disappear, about the particular loneliness of being the most recognized face in the world and having no one who related to you simply as a human being, about being owned by the colonel, by the fans, by the machinery of an industry that had long since stopped caring whether the man inside the legend was surviving it. He used an alias when he traveled. John Burroughs. It was his go-to name for hotel check-ins, for private bookings, for any moment when he needed to exist outside the gravitational pull of being Elvis. That alias is documented. It's not disputed. And it matters here because it tells you something essential about his psychological state, that he had already been practicing disappearance in small, manageable doses for years. He already knew what it felt like to move through the world without the weight of his own name. He had already been rehearsing. Now factor in the sighting at Memphis International Airport on the night of August 15, 1977, the night before Elvis was officially found dead. Multiple witnesses, independently of each other, reported seeing a man they believed to be Elvis boarding a private flight, not a commercial airline, a private charter. the kind of arrangement that leaves minimal paper trails and asks very few questions. This detail has been documented, investigated, and never fully explained away. The official response has always been mistaken identity. But mistaken identity requires a mistake, and multiple independent witnesses seeing the same man in the same place on the same night is a pattern, not an error. Then there are the post-1977 sightings, and before you picture obsessive fans seeing their idol in every stranger's face, understand that the most credible of these accounts didn't come from fans at all. They came from business associates, from people with no emotional investment in Elvis being alive, people who had professional interactions with him during his career, and who years later reported encounters with a man who carried himself with unmistakable familiarity. A sighting in Kalamazoo in 1988 generated enough serious attention that it was investigated by journalists, not tabloids, and the investigation didn't conclusively debunk it so much as run out of threads to pull. And there is the life insurance policy. Elvis Presley had a life insurance policy. It was never collected. In the immediate aftermath of his death, with an estate already in financial distress and a family navigating the enormous complexity of his legacy, that policy was left untouched. Insurance companies and estate attorneys have since noted that this is extraordinarily unusual, not just uncommon, but the kind of thing that happens so rarely in cases of legitimate, uncontested death that it constitutes a financial anomaly that has never been satisfactorily explained. There's a deeper current running beneath all of these details, though. Something more human than aliases and airport sightings and uncollected policies. And it's this: we want Elvis to be alive. That impulse is so powerful, so culturally embedded, that it's almost impossible to examine the evidence clearly without accounting for it. We want him alive because his death represented something beyond personal loss. It represented the moment the dream of a certain kind of American innocence finally ran out of road. It represented what happens when a system takes everything a person has, their talent, their autonomy, their privacy, their health, and keeps asking for more until there's nothing left to give. And so we have to ask ourselves honestly whether our desire to believe in his survival is clouding our judgment, or whether the evidence is genuinely pointing somewhere that our discomfort keeps making us look away from. The forensic analyst who started this entire conversation doesn't claim Elvis is alive. She has been careful and deliberate about that distinction. She isn't trafficking in hope or mythology. She is making a single, precise, forensically grounded claim that the biometric data derived from the casket photograph does not match the biometric data derived from authenticated images of Elvis Aaron Presley. That is her conclusion. That is where the science lands. What it means is a question she leaves to the rest of us. Because if she's right, if that is not Elvis in the casket photograph, then someone made an extraordinary series of decisions across a very short window of time. Decisions that required resources, cooperation, and a shared commitment to a story that would hold under the weight of public grief and global scrutiny for nearly 50 years. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen without planning. And it doesn't happen without the involvement of people who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly why. Whatever the truth is, whether Elvis walked away or was taken by the brutal arithmetic of the life he was living, someone went to extraordinary lengths to make absolutely certain you would never find it. And the fact that we're still looking, that might be the most telling detail of all. Some stories don't have clean endings. They just have people left behind, learning to carry what was left to them. If this one moved you the way it moved me, Leave a comment and tell me what it brought up. Subscribe, because the stories that matter most are always the ones nobody finished telling.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel